let's discuss what some of the pitfalls are that we've seen in deployments that we have helped out with. Pitfall number one is really underpowered hardware, first and foremost. There's no good reason to underspec your hardware. Hardware is relatively cheap, and given that Tableau supports virtualization, and I even have a link at the end of the presentation to a white paper on virtualization from Tableau, it's very important that you have virtualization know-how and implement best practices to prevent performance degradation and or resource contention. For example, you don't want to have a 16-core box and create 4 VMs that each have 16 cores and run the database on one and the Tableau server on the other one. You're going to probably have resource contention down the road, and then you're going to have to peel back the layers and try to figure that out. So again, that's something we can help you with, is setting up the proper VMware or virtualization environment. And Tableau is different from traditional BI, and so you can't treat it like your standard report where you run a query, it runs the list report, and you push it out. Tableau, by definition, generally your users are very interactive. This places more load on the server. Likewise, if they're doing ad hoc or data discovery, it's very hard to sort of pin down what a typical user session might look like, and that needs to be considered when you size your hardware, when you determine how you're going to configure the server with regards to the various components or cluster considerations, cluster configurations, as well as how you design your test environments using things like TabJolt or Mercury Interactive. Again, this can be complex and tricky, and it's something that we can help you out with. So we've seen a lot of customers where they underspec their hardware, and it really ends up costing them a lot more down the road. So don't underpower your hardware, and consider all of those variables when you're going into it. Likewise, we see some customers, they just install with the defaults and go. They just click right through the screens. Boom, they say, oh, you know, I've got a big box here, and I'm just going to run through this and let this thing go. The reason that happens is a lot of times, again, we see Tableau in the line of business. And, you know, Bob or Sheila, the analyst, is an analyst, is a Power Tableau desktop user, and they don't know the ins and outs of the aforementioned hardware administration and clustering, and they don't even know what that stuff is, right? So they just get a box and they hammer it out, and it's running under their desk. So some of the challenges with that are that authentication settings, for example, cannot be changed post-installation. So if you decide to do Active Directory versus local and you change your mind, guess what? You've got to do a complete reinstallation. You can't just go flip a switch. Likewise, Tableau only allows for only one authentication provider to be supported. You can't have an LDAP and an Active Directory and local. You got to pick one. If you need to support multiples, you need to pick local and use either scripting or their APIs to integrate those, and that's something we've helped customers with. Clustering in HA, while is not a one-way trip, you should consider that at the outset so you're not having to sort of reconfigure and do all that stuff down the road. And then oftentimes we see people charging down the path where they haven't given any thought to the organization of the server, the aforementioned projects and things like that. There's no security and no governance, and then you just end up with kind of replicating the clown show and environment that you've created in your desktop environment, and you're asking for chaos, which leads to dissatisfaction, lack of adoption, and all the problems that you're trying to kind of elevate yourself out of. So it's important to step back and plan your installation and not just necessarily accept the defaults. So some other installation challenges we see are, again, cluster configurations, right? This can be tricky. There's a lot of dials and knobs that can be changed, and there's reasons, pros and cons for each one. You need to consider authentication. If you're with Active Directory, how are you syncing that with and lining those up with the various roles and whatnot within Tableau to secure your environment? Are you using SAML? Are you using Kerberos or OpenID? Do you need SSL? How do you configure that server role-based security if you're doing that? How does it integrate, and how does it map to your Active Directory roles? How do you trace down performance issues? And then in the not-too-distant future, Tableau is they have alphas out of their Linux environment, so you'll have operating system considerations in the not-too-distant future. So all things you want to think about. When you think about cluster configurations, and for those of you business users in the audience, bear with me, there is plenty of business content in here, but it's kind of interspersed with some of this technical stuff. But all you need to know from this chart is that the cluster configuration that you choose has a huge impact on scale, right? As you add boxes, So a standalone versus a primary with 1, 2, 3, and 4 workers. So this is a single node. This is 5 nodes. Your first one is really just a failover. And then your second one, you start to see this linear scalability with V10. And it has huge implications for the throughput of your users. Now, obviously, that drives cost, so you need to look at a bunch of different things. Another component of that is your risk profile. So if this is a departmental or for a small group and it's fine if it's down on the weekends, then maybe a standalone server is fine. If you need better availability, but you're looking for, or sorry, you're trying to reduce resource contention, but you're not necessarily concerned about availability, you move up the chain a little bit. If you need high availability and high performance, you might need to pony up for the bigger environment. So you need to balance your risk profile with your costs and other considerations to land on the right configuration. Pitfall number 3 is really around sort of insufficient care and feeding, and hopefully some of you recognize the Little Shop of Horrors there. This speaks to more of the administration, and that does get overlooked in a lot of cases. I mentioned before, you install with the default. It's under Bob the Analyst's desk. There's no organization, no security. Tableau does provide a whole lot of built-in capabilities, data source views, notifications on things like extract failures and whatnot, revision histories that I showed you that allow you to optimize what is used, know what's going on, and remove what isn't. Use those tools. Little things like ensuring your database drivers are installed on the server for all your data sources so your users don't get errors and get driven to the Tableau site to have to go or come back to you to install the driver. Again, frustrates them. Maybe they go away, they go back to Excel, and you can ease that pain. Optimize your data sources, more on that later, right? Identify the ones that are being used the most and optimize those, and also rationalize them. So this is a snapshot of data source views in Tableau. I showed you a very simple one. This is a more robust one. So it's a list of all of these different data sources here. It shows you the views, the workbooks, and it's sorted by the amount of views, right? The importance relatively of the data source, as it were. So obviously production FAO stat is a key data source here out on Amazon Redshift, and then we kind of move down the chain. So if you see data sources down here that are zeros and haven't been touched, maybe it's time to roll them off because they're just taking up space. Likewise, maybe food variants and food transactions are just permutations of a data source that really should be one data source that would take up half as much space, or if it's an extract, it would, you'd only need one schedule for it. There's a lot of different considerations. You can see these are two different data sources, so that's not the case, but data source rationalization is definitely something that should be part of kind of ongoing care and feeding. And Tableau tries to help you out with some of that stuff, and they're always adding new things to the product in that regard. Pitfall number 4 is really more around a lack of governance, and governance is a very popular term these days. It's kind of a big data term where nobody knows exactly what it is, but it's really, beyond just the administration, the care and feeding. It's this combination of people and process and technology, and you really need all three. Tableau as technology is not just going to give you an excellent environment. You need to have processes around data and metadata stewardship, for example. You need to have people that are involved and knowledgeable. So around, I just touched upon a few of these, but data, metadata stewardship, you have to ask yourself, how many versions of the truth do you want? One of Tableau's greatest strengths is also, can be its greatest weakness. The metadata in Tableau is at the workbook level. So those of you folks out there that are Cognos folks or BobJ folks or MicroStrategy, you're used to this centralized metadata that's highly governed, and they talk about kind of single versions of the truth. With Tableau, you can literally have people out there recreating their own metadata several times over and pushing those up to your server. And then you've got the age-old problem of people coming to the meeting with different numbers. The technology is not going to help you with that. You need people and a process behind that. So consider a BICC, a Business Intelligence Competency Center, or sometimes I've heard it called a Visualization Center of Excellence, but that's really what that is. It provides that governance. You define what those processes are going to look like, how you're going to handle dev and test and QA and production, how you're going to handle data sources and schedules and all those myriad things that I've sort of talked about. And then the last thing around here that I'll mention is keep it simple, silly with your data. Right? We see some people, they take these very complex metadata models and they throw them out there, and you scare your users away. Keep it simple when you're moving up to ad hoc and data discovery. keep it simple. Walk before you run. Don't just go dump your huge enterprise model up there and expect that people are just going to kind of pick up and run with that. So what we see with our customers is where they've created an audit project on the server and a production project on the Tableau server. So they first have people publish to audit, kind of like that sandbox environment that I was showing you. And then they get user blessing, so they go through some UAT before they publish it to the production area. So it's worked really well in terms of keeping garbage from getting onto the production side. Same thing for data extracts and whatnot. So we definitely see that out in the wild in successful environments. So pitfall number 5 is letting your Tableau versions get too far out of date. Tableau is kind of in, I would say, kind of in the middle of their maturity curve. They've been around for a while, but they've really introduced very significant performance enhancements with each major version. Each major version. Sorry, I can't form sentences here. Particularly from version 8 to version 9. So we have one client in particular that saw high double-digit decreases in load times for virtually all of their workbooks, simply moving from 8.3 to version 9, and we'll dive into a little bit of that right now. So upwards of really having those times and getting most of those workbooks down to load in under 5 seconds. But the caveat to that, kind of the corollary, or maybe the opposite of that, is don't just jump to the latest version assuming that's going to fix your problems. You definitely don't want to do that. You need to do your homework, look for known issues, maybe have a few other people test the waters first, have a testing plan that represents your reality, represents all of your use cases, and always, always, always make sure you perform backup so you can fall back if for some reason you encounter something that you didn't expect. So don't just leap, but definitely consider these upgrades and don't let things get too stale. So to back that up, between version 9 and version 8, because they went to 64-bit and they introduced a bunch of different things, you see performance improvements of 2 to 50x, right? Very significant performance improvements. So for the data engine overall, running, and this is based on a document that I posted at the end of the presentation as well. It's a preview of the query performance improvements. There's a 10x improvement just for the overall data engine, though. So those are for really, extracts and how it handles queries overall. Key among the performance improvements are they introduced parallel queries in version 9 that provide a 9x improvement, right? So rather than having to execute queries in serial and wait for one to finish, you can imagine that is a huge performance gain. Likewise, they introduced query fusion, which results in a 2x improvement. So if a query was at a different grain or had a subtle difference, but they could kind of tease out the information, they'll use this query fusion, and that provides a 2x improvement. External query caching is huge. If you don't even have to go back to the database, they introduced that at 9, you have a 50x improvement in performance. And then they added things like, they added some vectorization capabilities, which they didn't quantify. So they're always adding things to the server to improve performance, right? Performance is always a consideration. Now, Tableau 10, they focused more on broadening the use cases they could cover, and the biggest thing was query federation. So the ability to join across data sources and support multiple data sources beyond basic blending. So V10 was more focused on complexity and completeness of solution than performance per se, but they did add things like initial workbook load so that it pre-caches that, so your initial workbook loading experience is better. And then you can see from this chart, you don't actually have to read it, the orange bars are V9.3, and again, this is as you scale up to multiple nodes. The blue bars are V10, so you can see that at scale, they really started, outpacing what 9.3 could do on version 10. So performance, always a big hot button for people, and being on the latest version is a good way to ensure you're getting the maximum performance in general. So pitfall number 7, and this is a big one. When we ask people what is the biggest thing that is a barrier to this successful deployment of Tableau Server, the number one item is this one, is data prep. So guess what, that your spreadsheet, your 12 spreadsheet blended workbook, if you just push that thing up to server and 1,000 people start hitting it, it's going to tip over, right? It's time for a database, but which one? Right? Do you want a standard relational database, a columnar database, an in-memory database, a cloud database, a massive, an MPP database, something like Snowflake or Redshift? Do you use extracts, or is that, are you beyond extracts, or is that a bad idea? What is Hyper? So Hyper is kind of the next generation of Tableau's data engine. It's an acquisition they made about a year ago that they've actually rolled out on Tableau Public now, and they're going to start rolling it out in Tableau proper. And what are the implications for your data strategy? What kind of ETL or data prep do you need to perform on your data before it gets into Tableau? What are the benefits, what are the pros and cons of that? And then what tool are you going to use? Are you going to use Maestro? So Tableau has their own data prep tool that they're developing that, again, is slated for release later this year. What are the implications for that? Do you have do you want to use a power user tool like Alteryx or Trifacta? Do you have an enterprise ETL tool like SSIS or Informatica or DataStage? There's so many tools, it's really kind of dizzying, and this is really where, this is what Senturus has been doing for over 16 years, and we're particular experts in that. Dashboard design is really important with regard to data prep. You need to always start with the business question, the business value, and your end user experience, and back into it from that. Right? Typically, you'll have dashboards. You want people coming in at a high level of summarization. That might be hitting an aggregate table or an extract, and then you use actions and whatnot to then drill down, and then maybe you're hitting a live source via that. So you'll have this combination of data sources all designed to provide maximum performance and security and a great user experience. And then the last piece here is really that source data structure. So there's tons of different kinds of sources that lend themselves more or less to analytics. So transactional sources like CRM systems, SFDC, marketing systems like Marketo or Eloqua, ERP systems, survey data. Those are not things you can just plug into Tableau and expect them to perform or even give you the answers that you need. You generally have to prepare that data in some way, shape, or form. And again, that's an area that we particularly shine at. So some 2/3 of the folks that we surveyed said that that was one of the biggest barriers to both desktop and server success and adoption. So that's a real big one. That probably should have been, if I ranked these, that would have been #1. So pitfall number 8 is not putting any consideration into security. You're just sort of winging it, right? And again, here there are a lot of options. Which one's best? Do you push it to the database? Do you have a database table that you hook into your analyses that handles that? Do you do security at the workbook level using user or group filters? Or do you get into do you do it at the server level? Well, the answer is yes. You do all of those. There's a lot of different options. And when I look at server, for example, this is what a Tableau server architecture looks like from a high level. You have servers that can have multiple sites, and in each of those sites you'll have workbooks that have multiple views and data sources. You can apply security at any level within the server. Generally speaking, though, you want to do the extent to which you can apply security at the higher level. So maybe not the site, but perhaps at the workbook level or the project level. The higher you can do that, the less maintenance you're going to have, and the more you get down to applying these at the lowest level, you're really asking for challenges and a lot of maintenance. And why is that? Well, because site roles, Tableau has a number of different security components. You have site roles, you have permission rules and templates that are applied to those site roles. You have content ownership rules, you have group permissions and user permissions that really can end up just confusing you and lead to unpredictable behavior if not applied correctly, because the permissions are additive and Tableau follows rules when applying those various permissions. So again, this is something that you want to think out and not just sort of wing when you're going into Tableau Server. And we could really probably do a whole other webinar on that alone, and perhaps we will down the road. Pitfall number 9 is you've always got to consider your end users, right? Whether that's dashboard design or how you're deploying things out on server. Because ultimately, the best dashboard is the one that they live and die by and that you have to pry out of their cold dead hands, right? Regardless of best practices and everything else. So always start with your end users. A good example of that is leveraging, for example here, device-specific layouts for your users to improve their dashboard experience and improve the overall level of adoption. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So I'm going to jump over here back to my Tableau workbook, and I have a dashboard here that, again, is sort of the output of one of our workshops. I've jammed a few more things in here. It's not necessarily a best practice dashboard, but the idea is that you've got a lot of stuff in here, right? And because I'm on a high-resolution desktop monitor, it's still a serviceable dashboard, right? I've got a lot of prompts. I've got all my various legends and whatnot in here, and right, it's a little bit of a hairball, but it does sort of fit on the screen, and I can at least maybe use this thing. If, however, I needed to view this on an iPhone, for example, and I sort of left Tableau to its own designs, and I'm going to make this kind of silly. Tableau has these device-specific layouts, so I'm going to kind of illustrate what this looks like because I can't really show my phone on the screen. I'm going to pick let's say I've got an executive who won't let go of their old iPhone 5 with the tiny screen. When I create this device-specific layout, I pick the iPhone 5, you'll see Tableau draws this rectangle here, and I click Add Phone Layout, and then I'm going to go fit it all in there. Now this dashboard, if I pull that up on my phone and my executives saw this, they would immediately close it, right? It's completely useless. So what I can do is, rather than leaving Tableau to its own designs and have it sort of jam all this stuff in here, is I can go and then clean up this view, and I'm going to pull a Martha Stewart here and go to the finished turkey because that I'm going to pull out of the oven because I don't have the time to do this individually. But I can take that same dashboard and pare it down. I get rid of the legends, I get rid of the prompts. I just have two views that fit on my iPhone 6 in this case, and then I have a slightly more rich one for tablets, and I can create as many of these different views based upon what I know my end user population is going to be like. And then if it falls outside of one of these specific ones, then Tableau uses algorithms to kind of optimize it, and there's other settings you can use. But the idea is that when you use these specific layouts, if I go into my iPhone, this is not usable. If I create a device-specific layout, I have a positive experience, my users love it, they continue using it, and my adoption rates go up. So that's an example of why you always need to consider your end users. Now, pitfall number 10 is insufficient training. Again, when we polled the audience and surveyed our customers, some 35% or so, or 40% I believe it was, actually said that training was a big barrier. Many of you who are Tableau gurus or BI gurus can make that mental shift really quickly, whether it's from desktop to the web or from one tool to another. You should not presume that your end users have such mental agility. That's not to understate their intellectual capacity. It's just that this can be very scary for them. So even though you go to the web, and I said it's just like being on desktop, you don't necessarily know that, and you don't know that they're not going to get scared away. So you need to train your end users to understand the capabilities, understand the differences, and understand the data that they're working with, right? So they're comfortable with it, and they have faith with it, and they know what to do, and they don't get scared away. Encourage them to ask questions and sort of establish that culture. From an administrative perspective, as I mentioned before, care and feeding, people need to understand what's there on the server in terms of administration. And then there's other things that they probably want to start being conversant in, the config utility, things like tab admin, tab command, and maybe even the REST APIs, depending how far into that you want to get going. Or you want to go. But training is critical for both the end users and the administrators. And then kind of our the OCD in me wanted to keep this to 10, but I couldn't help myself. We got a bonus pitfall. Pitfall number 11, our last one, is just rip and replace legacy BI. So we hear customers saying, yeah, we're just going to take this Cognos application, we're just going to throw it into Tableau, no problem. And that can be a real big tripping hazard. You need to analyze the current application to determine the best way to convert to Tableau. Key among those is understanding what's the functionality of the current application, make sure that that exists in Tableau, and even more than that is, do I really want to replicate this application in Tableau? And generally the answer to that is a pretty easy no. And there's a reason you've adopted Tableau, because it's visual. And oftentimes you can take what are hundreds or even thousands of reports in some case, and you can rationalize those into a few reports or one report using hierarchies, drill paths, using actions and prompts, And this is your opportunity to both rationalize that and make those more visual and interactive. And maybe you're going to enable ad hoc, and you have to consider your distribution and your deployment. How are you going to get these things out to the end users? And how does that application, how does your old application do it, and how might Tableau handle that? So don't just think you can just drop it into Tableau and go off to the races. It's not necessarily a good idea for a number of different reasons. So those are our top pitfalls that we see. And in summary, Tableau Server, as we hopefully illustrated to you, is a very powerful tool and is a great path for those of you who are kind of outgrowing pure desktop. However, you need to plan ahead for its installation, support its care and feeding. Data preparation is critical. You need to establish governance from both a data stewardship and an administration, leveraging people, process, and technology. You need to consider security very carefully. You need to get and provide training for both your end users and administrators. And, of course, never, ever forget the end user. Start with the end user and end with the end user, because they're the ones that are going to make your project a success or a failure. And I'll make a last plug here where, I have our little Senturus superhero guys. The team here at Senturus, I can't say enough about them. They have this unique alchemy of brains and artistry and business savvy that I put together in our little superhero. So it's what we do all day, every day. We get up and we make the complex simple, and we create analytic solutions and help people, help our customers build their analytic solutions every day. So let us help you. And with that, I will hand it back over to Jim to talk about some of our offerings.
Thanks, Mike. Great job. That was a lot of material that you fit into a small amount of time there. So now that you know about the benefits of Tableau Server, if you're interested in trying it out, please send us a note, and we are happy to work with you on a guided evaluation of the software. You can either chat that or email me at jfrazier@senturus.com. and we will get you a trial of the software and help you install it and evaluate it. And for those people so we had a lot of folks on the line that were interested in Tableau Server. That first offer will appeal to you. The second offer here today is for those of you on the line that indicated you were already using Tableau Server, but maybe you aren't getting the results you would like from it. We have our Tableau Server optimization assessment. For this, Senturus will come in, review your server configuration and settings, as well as your hardware sizing. We'll check the network and hardware configurations for best practices, take a look at your back-end data structures and see if they're causing any of the problems. We'll analyze a sample set of worksheets and dashboards to troubleshoot any performance issues that you might be having. And out of this work, we produce a document and presentation outlining our findings and recommendations to optimize your deployment of Tableau Server. The cost of this assessment is fixed at $2,995, and we guarantee that we'll either find some areas where you can improve or leverage your investment in Tableau Server, improve your operations, or diagnose problems to provide better performance or stability of your implementation, or we'll give you your money back.